and tell me because he's got so many credentials. Adjunct Professor of Genetics, Department of Clinical Services, Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine, Tufts University. Chairman, Hereditary Disease Committee, World Small Animal Veterinary Association, Director OFA, Canine Health Information Center, and the AKC Health and Welfare Advisory Panel. He is a private practitioner at Freshwater Veterinary Hospital in Enfield, Connecticut. Okay. He is the author of Medical Guide to Dogs and Cat Breeds. He was trained at Michigan State University, anybody heard of Michigan? And the University of Missouri. He got his DVM degree at Cornell University, and he and his wife breed and show Gordon Centers. Welcome, Dr. Bell.
I've got that away. Okay, you can hear me? All right, so thank you all for coming, a great crowd. So I appreciate doing this. I am somewhere between 75 to 80 parent breed clubs where I've done a breed health seminar at their nationals. So about a third of the way through. I don't know that I'm going to live long enough to complete that sweep, but very interesting studying each breed. When I wrote the book, I had to study each breed and write a chapter on it, and that got me well versed on not only breeds but diseases and everything else. And then the in-depth dive into each breed when I do these seminars is just so interesting to me. I mean, it takes weeks of work and you'll see all the work that's done because it's all specialized for your breed. So I hope you enjoy it. But this is not a genetics lecture. There are maybe 3 or 4 fancy words that I will use that I will define for you. Otherwise, it's really about the practical genetics for collie breeders and owners. What do you need to know to breed a healthier dog? And what do you need to know about the background of your breed? So this seminar is in 2 parts. And the first part has nothing to do with health. It all has to do about breeding collies and the background of your breed. And so I hope you find that interesting. There will be a break. I know you're scheduled for a 15-minute break. I would even ask if we could do a 10 because there was a lot of health stuff in there. And I want to keep it, try to keep it straight to 3 hours. But whatever, we'll work through it. And it might not be exactly at the 10:30. It might be more like 10:20 or something like that. But I hope you guys are a little flexible with that. Okay, so as Pat mentioned, I am on the board of directors of the OFA. It is the largest repository of health test information in dogs in the world. It is a not-for-profit organization or foundation. Anything that we generate through testing and through registering and the money that you send in for your applications goes directly back to health research. We've paid over $500,000 to the Canine Health Foundation. We've paid a lot of money to Morris Animal Foundation and a lot of researchers specifically researching genetic diseases of dogs. And so I'm very proud to work with that group. I am a full-time solo practitioner at Freshwater Veterinary Hospital in Enfield, Connecticut. I taught for 25 years at Tufts, the second-year veterinary students for their clinical genetics course, and I stepped down after 25 years, let the younger folks do that. I just had so much more. It took up all my time, and I have just so many more things to do on the national, international level to try to help with genetics of dogs and improving the health of dogs worldwide. I claim to be a breeder of Gordon Setters, although I have never made a breeding decision in my life. My wife makes all the decisions, and because she's really the Gordon Setter breeder that I married. And so this is our Bob, who's at home right now. This was the day he attained his junior hunter title. With our breed, you can kind of see that it took about 2 hours to get all the twigs and sticks and things out of him. So that's how we rewarded him with his JH, was to stand on the table for 2 hours and get all that stripped out. This is his litter sister, Maddie. They were born in our home. These are homebred. This was the day she took breed at Westminster about 3 years ago, and that was 2 or 3 years ago, and that was 3 years to the day after her mother took breed at Westminster as a homebred bitch. And so we enjoy breeding and working with our dogs. We've got master hunters, and we do. Actually, Bob loves when we had him with the field trainer. She had a little lake with a dock on it, and he loved to run down to the dock and dive into the lake. So she took him dock diving, did some dock diving with him. I mean, we do what the dogs want to do. I always put juniors on because for our breed, it was a hunting breed. I want to see that I'm maintaining what the breed was developed for. If you're not breeding for what the breed was developed for hundreds of years, then what are you breeding for? And you can run into problems. You run into OCD and you got dogs that had jobs and you don't give them jobs. They get into trouble. So we always like to see that they have that instinct, and then to go on to senior or master is only if they really, and you can tell if they're just dying to do it and they have to go. Otherwise, and we just have fun with them at home. But we try to get at least juniors on all of our dogs. Okay, so actually, hold on. So we are going to do polling today. I need to set up my hotspot here. But you guys can just use your phones. I forgot about this, so let me just do it real quick. Yeah, I didn't figure this out from the beginning. All right, hold on for a second. I got to go to my settings. So, turn your ringers off, but here we go. Okay, now let's go back and see if we've got it. Yeah. Come on, come on. Apologize for this. I didn't realize you guys didn't have Wi-Fi in here. I should have set this up beforehand.
But we put ours on 5G, and that seems to work.
Yeah, it should work for you guys. Okay, now we're up. Yes. Okay, so the first question is just a fun question. The easiest way to do this is to go to a web page on your phone, and the address is pollev.com/collies. And if you do that, every question will just pop up and you can answer it quickly in that way. And if you want to text, then you're texting. I'm just kind of adjusting here. Hold on one sec. Then you're texting to the address 22333, and you're going to text the word collies, and you only have to do that once. And then after that, you would answer the question A, send, or B, send. So again, the easiest way to do it is pollev.com/collies, and just tap your answer. Or if you're texting 22333, The first time only send the word Collies, and then you just send your answer A, send, or B, send. So we've got the numbers racking up here. Got 26, 28 people, so you're all getting connected. And then from here on, it's just easy to find the answer. You don't have to log in. If it asks you to log in or put in this is all anonymous, so you don't have to log in. Just if you want to accept or cookies or not, doesn't really matter. We're just answering the questions. Okay, so we're more people coming in, 38, 39. So I'm just going to go ahead and find the answer, and you can keep on working on it because this is more of a fun question. So let's see if we can get the answer here. Hold on. Okay, so 100% of you love Collies, and none of you love Siamese cats, so everyone's in the right room, because otherwise the cat people would be very confused about what we're talking about all day today. All right. The next question is a free-form question. So you're just going to type in your answer and hit send. Whether you're texting or if you're using the web page, just in that little box, you're going to type in your answer. It doesn't have to be complete sentences. You can just put in words and commas or whatever. What is the greatest genetic health issue of Collies? And if you want to list more than one thing, that's fine. If 20 people list DMS, you can stop putting DMS. But let's just get some answers as to what we feel the biggest genetic health issues are for the breed. So we've got bloat, we've got DMS, we've got eyes, we've got PRA, MDR1, eye problems, immune system problems, temperament, IMA and mediated, well, IMA is what? Mediated anemia? Okay. Collie anomaly, eye troubles, lack of genetic diversity, eyes, bloat, kidneys, coloboma, bloat eyes, MDR1, eyes, DM, and DMS. So we're going to talk about DM because it's really not a breed-related issue for your breed. So we really should not be looking at that to concentrate. Okay, so you're hitting all the high points that we're going to be dealing with today in the talk, which is good. All right. So next, what are your questions concerning the genetic health of Collies? So if you have particular questions that you want to make sure that I cover today, what are those? Discoid lupus, okay, dermatomyositis, MDR1, oh, well, these might be still answers left over from the last question. Is there a way around the bottleneck? We'll talk about that. Is there a bottleneck? I mean, there's always a bottleneck, but does it make any difference? That's the question. Discoid lupus, dominant genes. Definitely DM in relation to Collies we'll talk about. Why do breeders not emphasize health first and foremost? Good question. I mean, we want wonderful dogs, we want beautiful dogs, we want smart dogs, but we want healthy dogs. And we want to pass on healthy dogs to our owners that have become members of their families. We don't want them to have dogs that are going to become sick. Dominance, aggressiveness, allergies, best resources to learn, inflammatory bowel disease. What should we as buyers look for or ask for in puppies? Research into epilepsy. That's Dr. Clark will be speaking to you Wednesday, Thursday? Yeah. Overlook health for phenotype, drug reactions. Genetic component of colobomas. What we know, we can tell you. How do you know where to start? Yeah, right. Gastro issues. Do Collies have a different scale in DMS reactivity compared to Shelties? That's for Dr. Clark as well to answer. Even though she's a geneticist, she has more background in the variations that have been seen. Thyroid, temperament, how is temperament carried? It's complex, like most of the issues we deal with. So when we talk about how to deal with complex inheritance, it's the same. It's going to be the same answers. Tiny eyes, picking optimal mates, new medications with MDR1. Dr. Mealy is so concerned about that. She is testing every new medication, and so many new medications really involve MDR1 and are going to be dangerous for your breed that has 2 copies or even 1 copy of the MDR1 gene. Outcross line breed, type breed, bloat, genetic or behavioral. Genetic or environmental, because I guess behavioral is genetic and environmental, but definitely a big environmental component to bloat. Okay, good enough. All right, so a large number of individuals in a breed population provides greater choices when making breeding decisions. So luckily you've got a large population breed. You're not dealing with a small population breed where you don't have a lot to choose from. You have a large population breed. You do have some high frequency disorders where you may not have a lot to choose from, or you don't feel you have a lot to choose from because you don't have a lot of absolutely normal dogs, and you don't want to bottleneck yourself that way either. So we'll talk about how to slowly move from those positions. But big populations give you more choices, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about selection, because I was raised, before I became a veterinarian, I was an animal science major. So I was taught on large animal breeding and genetics, and about selection and selective pressure and beef and milk and chickens and poultry, all that kind of stuff. So selection is really the most important thing that you guys need to think about, because it's not just about breeding, it's what you're breeding. If you're not making informed and at least somewhat educated selection decisions, then what you get is going to be a crapshoot. And with proper selection, you really can improve and change things very rapidly in your breeding programs. So what we need to understand is that with each selected trait or disorder, so the traits we're selecting for, the disorders or diseases that we're selecting against, it's the same thing, it's just selection, okay? The proportion of the available gene pool decreases. So the more things that we are selecting for or against with each particular mating, it lowers the selective pressure for each of those traits. So if you're trying to select for 10 things, you're not going to move the needle very much on all 10 of them. If you're only selecting for 2 or 3, if you say in this mating, I'm going to concentrate on that, reach and foreleg, or on a top line, or I'm going to concentrate really on going deep dive on a deep pedigree dive of what these dogs carry, what they have, what they've passed on in prior matings, and I'm going to correct this fault in this mating. And that's your major thing that you're doing, aside from your health testing and other things like that. Then you're going to probably improve that. But if you're going to say, well, I got tail set, I got top line, I got reach, I've got head, I've got this, and then I've got all the tests, you're probably not going to make as much progress with each one of those things. And the thing is that with each trait or disorder that you're looking at, the proportion of your gene pool decreases. So if this circle represents your gene pool, and you only want to select for a dog that has a certain genetic test result, then only that overlapping area of the gene pool are the dogs that you're now considering for breeding. And then if you're looking at a trait that you want to select for, and you're looking at the dogs that carry that trait and also have that genetic test result, then that makes that proportion even smaller in the overlapping segments. And you add another genetic test, and you add another trait, and very quickly you're only looking at a very small portion of your gene pool that you're actually considering if you're going to have all of those things that you want in selecting a stud dog, or in deciding on what bitch you're breeding to, or that you want to keep a puppy from, or whatever. So it is important that we really determine what we're going to do with each mating, and focus on what's important for this generation and this mating, and not try to do everything all at once, because you're really not going to move things very far. Let's talk a little bit about the registration statistics of the Collie. So this is we're not going to go back this far, but if we go back to 1985 on AKC population, you were the 19th ranked breed, very popular breed. The Lassie bump, really shot you up there in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Over close to 20,000 collies registered that year. 5 years later, 17,337, you were ranked 24th. 5 years later, 12,800, ranked 29th. And then pretty much you dropped like 3,000 each year to 2000, 2005. And this is what everybody did. This was the drop in registrations that had the AKC shaking in their boots, thinking that purebred breeding was going away. And this was all economically factored. So that, you know, that we had recessions, we had all sorts of stuff going on, 80s and 90s and 2000s, and breeding was not, you know, if we had to choose what we were spending all our money on, breeding and showing, a lot of people stopped doing that or at least put a hold on it, and hopefully didn't discard their breeding stock. You know, we didn't lose a lot of our gene pool that way. Hopefully it just, you know, geared back up again as people started breeding. But pretty much, you know, your numbers here, they bounded back in 2015, 2016. Everybody bounded back. 2014 was actually the first bump that every single breed saw an increase in numbers, and then it has slowly grown back from there. And you're just about 2,900 dogs. Last year you were down slightly. Hard to say what that has to do about anything, but pretty much you're producing about 2,900 collies a year in AKC registrations. Your litters, number of litters registered in those same years, again, very high numbers early on, and you're pretty much producing over 1,000 litters a year in AKC breed numbers here. And so that's a lot of litters. That's enough variety to be able to give you choices, and that's what's the important thing there. If we take it's hard to determine the exact number of puppies born in each litter because that isn't recorded. All we can record is the number of dogs that are registered per litter through AKC. But if you look at the last 11 years, it's been pretty consistent, and actually it's gone up a little bit. So, you know, 5.5, 5.6, and lately 5.8 to 5.9 puppies per litter. So anyone that tells you that your breed is suffering from inbreeding depression and decreasing litter sizes and, you know, and all of the key words that shake you in your boots and say this is horrible and inbreeding is horrible and it's bad are talking through their hats, because those molecular geneticists and those people that have discovered that they can figure out homozygosity through a DNA sample and they can sell it to you, and they can sell it to you a lot easier than they can sell you a panel of 250 genetic tests that have nothing to do with your dog. You know, so that in terms of marketing, this is what they're marketing to you right now, and it is all marketing. Because they were trained by population geneticists that were endangered species geneticists and dealing with species survival programs, and they're treating every breed as if it's an endangered species, which is not what we're dealing with. And it's completely different than breeding for purebred dogs. So we will talk about that. Okay, these are charts and things that have been delivered from the AKC to your parent breed clubs. This is what's called the litter complement that has been bred to date. The percentage of registered collies that actually get bred. And so you do have to ignore the last 5 years, because some bitches or dogs aren't bred until they're 4 or 5, and we know that. And then it hits a plateau. So pretty much 12% of all AKC registered collies are bred. And so what does that tell you? You want to talk about bottlenecks. If every generation only 12% of your dogs are being bred, that means 88% of your dogs are lost to the gene pool. All right? So if we're worried about bottlenecks, we shouldn't be worried about the scare factor bottlenecks that we're being told about. We should worry about not utilizing the quality dogs of our breed to produce the next generation. Because if they're not bred, then they are lost. So again, selection becomes that much more important, that we are utilizing the breadth of our gene pools, the breadth of our backgrounds of our breed. So I break the AKC breeds down to thirds, because in actuality, this in terms of population size, because in actuality, very small population breeds are going to use a much greater proportion of their dogs for breeding in the next generation, and very large population breeds are going to use a lot less. So be able to compare breeds together, I break it into thirds. And for the top 1/3 of AKC breeds by population, which is where you lie, that's you right here. You know, the Labradors are number 1 here, and the Malamutes are the last one in this top third here. The average is 10.4% of their breed is bred for the next generation. And your average is 11.6, you're slightly above that. Now, of course, you can see where the outliers are. Your French Bulldogs right now are just exploding in population, and we won't talk about that, but so 21% of all AKC registered French Bulldogs actually get bred, and you've got your Bulldogs there as well. You've got your Beagles, which are always being bred. You've got your English Cockers are a popular breed, and even though they're very populous, they do get bred a lot. But that's where you stand at 11.6, just slightly over the average for the top third population breeds. Okay. This next part of the talk is going to go over an article called The Ins and Outs of Pedigree Analysis, Genetic Diversity, and Genetic Disease Control. The long version of that article is found all over the internet. Serious Dog has a copy of it. You don't have to write it down real fast. You can just Google Ins and Outs of Pedigree and Bell, and it'll come up like 20 times. And a shortened version of this is in the handout. The handout is generic. None of the breed-specific stuff I'm talking about today is in that handout, but it's all the background information of understanding. So that'll be good. And in terms of trying to take notes today, it's being recorded. There's so much data in here. There's no way you can copy everything down. So get the recording, pause it, study it, and you'll learn a lot about your breed. So my next question is, my last mating was an, or if you didn't do a last mating, if you haven't bred yet, I prefer to do an inbreeding, a line breeding, an outbreeding, an outcrossing, or a crossbreeding. And I know the question is, well, can you define those, please? And I will on the next slide, but not until you answer this question. Okay, so 4% inbreeding, 68% line breeding, 10% outbreeding, 16% outcrossing, and no crossbreeding. So or a tiny amount of crossbreeding. Crossbreeding is breeding two different breeds together, like designer dogs, and so if you're doing colladoodles, then you're crossbreeding. Okay, out, and you can leave the room now. It disappeared, okay. We like to, as geneticists, we like to use the word cross when you're actually crossing breeds. And so I know to a breeder, outcrossing is what you call outbreeding. But to a geneticist, you're either doing line breeding or you're doing outbreeding. You're either breeding two dogs that are more closely related than the average of the population, or you're breeding two dogs that are less related than the average of the population. And that's the difference between in and out. So inbreeding is breeding closely related dogs. So I understand that as a breeder, inbreeding is father-daughter, full brother, full sister. It's not something, it's extremely rarely done and not something that most people would do unless they really know what they have produced in many matings in the past in many different directions and can fairly well predict that they're going to have good outcomes and not bad outcomes from that type of mating. Line breeding is what most of us do. It's a less intense, but I do have to say, I'll go on the next slide, but to a geneticist, an inbreeding coefficient, any dog where there's an ancestor on the sire side and an ancestor on the dam side that are the same dog, that produces some percent of inbreeding because of that relationship, and that would develop into an inbreeding coefficient, and that's one of the things that I will define for you. Line breeding is a less intense form of inbreeding, and as a breeder, you're trying to concentrate the genes of a particular ancestor. You liked this dog, you liked what it produced, and you want to double or triple up on it in different ways. Outbreeding, breeding dogs less related than the average of the population, so you need to know what the average is for the inbreeding coefficient. And then crossbreeding is two different breeds together. So here are three different populations of dogs. We've got a purebred dog, I think that's a Collie. And we've got a designer bred. This is the original designer bred dog, the Cockapoo, which came along long, long before designer breeds that even had a name to it. And then you've got your random bred dog. And I used to say that this really represents just two populations, because purebred dogs and designer bred dogs Who gets bred to who is decided by a human. So it's purposeful breeding. Whereas random bred dogs, it's only the dogs themselves that make that decision. Now, I have had to, and so we don't really have input on that. I have had to change my talk on this slide now because of, commercial breeders breed most of the dogs, in the country and in the world. It's a fact. America and the world loves dogs, and they love purebred dogs, or they love dog companions, and dog club members cannot produce the number of dogs that America wants, if we're just talking about America here. So, so the commercial breeders, they love to breed too. Many of them have the puppies in their home that are not, what we think of as a commercial operation. Some of them are still puppy mill operations, but the AKC does an amazing job going out into Amish country and going out to the Midwest and visiting all of these places and getting them up to speed with because it's not that difficult to get up to the proper standards to raise puppies and to breed. And these people love to breed. I mean, just like you love to do what you love to do, they do as well. And so as long as they're doing it in the right way, that's what happens. So when designer breeds came along, they were doing designer breeds because that's what America wants. And right now, America wants rescue dogs. They've gone the whole, don't adopt, don't shop, adopt. So it's all rescue dogs. And where do you think all these rescue dogs are coming from? You think America is littered with strays all over the country that are being found? And as a veterinarian, they all come in at like 10, 11 weeks of age. Like, how many stray puppies are all coming in at that age? So this is now the bred for rescue. This is what commercial breeders are doing. They're bred for rescue. They're selling to rescue organizations, or actually the pet stores that were put out of business bought themselves a 501c3 not-for-profit shelter license and are selling, purchasing dogs and selling dogs as a rescue. They're not making as much money as they were as a pet store, but they're still making money. And the same transports that transport all these guys, they have all those ventilated trucks and everything that used to supply to the pet stores. They're now supplying to the rescues and the shelters. And even the legitimate shelters in our area can't find enough dogs to adopt out, so they're purchasing their dogs as well. And it is what it is. America loves dogs. I can't fight it. I can't even say there's something wrong about it as long as the dogs are being treated well. But now we've got bred for rescue, and the same things that I talk about in terms of purposeful breeding, I don't care if it's purebred or mixed breed, you need to breed for health. You need to breed for healthy dogs, and that's always the top message. Okay, so one of my favorite cartoons, Get Fuzzy, and Rob says, ever heard the expression familiarity breeds contempt? And Satchel ponders and he says, no, in the dog world, we say familiarity breeds hip dysplasia. So this is what America believes, that because purebred dogs are inbred, that causes them to have the diseases that we see. And as a veterinarian and a geneticist, I know that I see as much genetic disease in mixed breed dogs as I see in purebreds. What is the #1 genetic disease of dogs? All dogs. Shout it out. Allergies, allergies. Every single day, all day long, okay? Are there more purebreds than mixed breeds? No. Are there certain purebred dogs that have more problems with allergies than others? Yeah. Are there certain, hip dysplasia? I palpate the hips on every single spay and neuter that I do. Amazing how much hip dysplasia is out there in the mixed breed dogs as well. It's not a purebred disease. These are high frequency genetic diseases of dogs. Mitral valvular disease. It doesn't matter if you're a small purebred dog or a small mixed breed dog, most of them are going to develop some mitral valvular disease. It's a body type conformation type of thing. So we need to understand and get the point across that are there breeds that have specific genetic diseases that need to be dealt with? Yes. Most of those are low frequency diseases, even though people talk a lot about them. They may only affect 5, 10, maybe even 15% of the breed. You've in terms of carrying those genes or whatever, you happen to have some high frequency genes. So you are in a particular situation where you've got some work to do, but you have tests and you have ways to try to mitigate that and work in that direction. But getting across this whole thing about inbred is bad is definitely something that we have always been dealing with. So let's talk, now I need to define for you the inbreeding coefficient, also known as the Wright's coefficient. Dr. Wright formulated this at the beginning of the 1900s. So I'm going to read the definition and then we're going to break it down into the words. The proportion of all variable gene pairs that are likely to be homozygous due to inheritance from ancestors common to the sire and dam. So what's that mean? The proportion of all variable gene pairs. So the genes that make a dog do not vary. The genes that make a collie do not vary. You don't breed two collies and get a chihuahua and go, oh, Mom, that's weird. So really, we're only talking with this inbreeding coefficient about the genes that vary within your breed, because more than 99% of the genes of your dogs are exactly the same as a dog. And so it's really only the differences between the ones that vary. The ones that are likely to be homozygous. Homo means the same. So it can be a, or it can be a little a. It doesn't matter what variation of that gene it is, but at both gene pairs, because all genes come in pairs, one from the sire, one from the dam, and they're paired up together. If they're the same, they're homozygous. If they're different, they're heterozygous, large A, little a. Okay? So the proportion of all variable gene pairs that are homozygous due to inheritance from ancestors common to the sire and dam, due to ancestors that are both the sire side of the pedigree and the dam side of the pedigree. So any dogs that are on both sides of the pedigree contribute to that inbreeding coefficient. So if we say that there's an inbreeding coefficient of 17%, we expect the variable gene pairs, 17% of them to be homozygous due to common inheritance. Another way of looking at that inbreeding coefficient is just to look at a single gene. So that's the total of all gene pairs. Another way of looking at it is just to look at a single gene pair. And what is the probability of that single gene pair being homozygous? 17%, due to common ancestry from the sire and the dam. So that's what the inbreeding coefficient tells you, and it tells you about homozygosity. The other thing I need you to understand is called the relationship coefficient. And that is a measurement of the probable genetic likeness between an individual and a particular ancestor. So if you say, I'm line breeding on Sam, and you get 37% on Sam, you would expect what you produce to have 37% of the genes that Sam had on average. Because dogs pass on 50% of their genes, but it's not always 50. Sometimes it's 41 and 60 the other. I mean, it's all like rolling the dice. So, but on average, that's what you would compute. It's the probable percentage of genes the individual and the ancestor have in common from descent. Now, there is a complicated formula for a relationship coefficient. Because if the ancestor is more line-bred and has a higher inbreeding coefficient than the mating that you're producing, there's a greater chance of that individual passing on more of its genes, so it raises that relationship coefficient slightly. And if that ancestor is more outbred than the mating that you're planning, then then his contribution can be lower in terms of his relationship. But it's only a tiny amount that correction factor actually factors in. So the easiest way to figure out relationships to ancestors that you're trying to line breed on is just looking at percent blood calculations. And to do that, you're just adding the percentage that each position in the pedigree would add to that for that dog. So a parent passes on 50%, a grandparent passes on 25%, a great-grandparent 12.5%, a great-great-parent 6.25%, and then 3.125 and 1.57, and you just cut it in half with each generation. And if if a dog is a great-grandparent on one side at 12.5, and a grandparent on the other side at 25, then it's 37.5% would be the percent blood calculation in relationship to the dog that you're looking to breed. Okay, so now I need to give a little explanation about the computerized database that I use to analyze your breed. I use the AKC computerized database. That is not the best database to use to understand about the formation and the depth and breadth of a breed, because the AKC is not in the business of maintaining a complete gene pool database. They are in the business of registering dogs. So all they care about is a 3 to 5 generation pedigree on every dog that gets registered. And then to add to that fact, the stud books go all the way back to the beginning. So usually with a much smaller population breed, you have a dedicated breeder somewhere in the world that has entered every single stud book from every single country and goes all the way back to founders, and we can really do a deep dive and say, these are there are 5 founders for this breed, and these are them, and these are the percentages, and really go into it like that. The AKC went from a mainframe computer in the late 1970s, early 1980s to their current system. And they did not import the data that they had, which was still incomplete. It didn't have all of the stud books in there anyway. But they did not input the data from there. They started from scratch and just filled in the 3 to 5 generations on any dogs that came in, and that's how they did it. I'm sure it was, some number cruncher said it would be really expensive to do that at that point. They didn't have all of the digital, devices that we have now and ways to import stuff. So they made that decision. So in actuality, the AKC database only goes back completely to the late 1970s and 3 to 5 generations prior to that. So in the entire AKC database, over 500,000 collies, 61 collies from the 1950s, 6,500 collies from the 60s, and then you've got your 70s and your 80s, 80s where you peaked at 195, your 90s at 129. You probably had a lot more in the 60s and 50s as well, but again, they weren't captured because that was before they went to the new system. And then you can see where those numbers have dropped, and that last line there is really only 2020 and 2021 because we're only in the early months of 2022 at this point anyway. So I want you to look at the number of generations, the average number of generations in a pedigree of a dog from these generations. So 3.4 generations in the 50s, and now we've got almost 40 generations that we can go back on our modern dogs right now. And here I want you to look at the mean number of unique ancestors in a pedigree. So in the 1950s, those 61 pedigrees usually only had about 8 dogs total in the pedigree. And when we say unique ancestor, if a dog appears more than once in a pedigree, they're only counted once. So we're not counting multiple times that they're in there, only the unique dogs that are there. So in today's dog, there's over 7,000 unique dogs in your pedigree that goes back 40 generations. When we look at calculating the inbreeding coefficient, the number of generations that we use to make that calculation is very important if you're doing it by pedigree. And then we'll talk about molecular genetic inbreeding coefficients, which the companies can do for us as well, but with the caveat of understanding what they're actually doing and what it actually means. If you look at 5 generations, for the 1950s, nobody went back 5, so everybody was at about 16.5% homozygosity in their pedigrees. As the pedigrees get deeper, in the 5 generation pedigree, the numbers start dropping below the 10 and the all generation generated inbreeding coefficients. Because what happens is, and a lot of people will base their numbers on a 10 generation coefficient, and then if you look at all of the generations going back, regardless of what generation it is, that is going to be a truer representation of the homozygosity of your dogs if you had a complete pedigree that goes back to founders, which we don't have. All right, but at least in terms of the AKC pedigrees, this is where the amount of homozygosity based on all of the generations going back. So you're at 9.3, 9.9 in this area here. And I don't know if we have enough dogs to say that actually dropped in the last 2 years, but that's a relatively normal number for from an AKC pedigree standpoint for a breed. So you are not a tightly bred breed. You are not a completely outbred breed. You're kind of sitting in the middle where most people are. And if you look at the differences between all generation, 10 generation, and 5 generation, it kind of tells you whether you guys concentrate on tight line breeding, on relatively close line breeding, in which case these numbers would be more equal to the deep numbers, or whether you really concentrate more on background inbreeding where your common ancestors are beyond 5 generations or beyond 10 generations. And that's kind of what we're seeing here, is that yes, there's some line breeding, closely, but most of it is in the background beyond 5 and 10 generations. So that's based on the entire Collie AKC pedigrees. So then I thought, you've got 2 varieties. You've got your roughs and your smooths. Are your smooths a separate not separate, because I know it's a variety and you're mixing all the time, but are they actually a different population? Are they concentrating on different lines? Are they concentrating on different dogs? And I thought, geez, that would be a really great analysis. Unfortunately, of a database of 583,000 dogs, people that fill out their blue slips do not check off variety. Only 11,394 dogs are checked off as a smooth collie out of over 500,000 dogs in the AKC database. So, it's data in, data out if you're not checking, and not that there's something wrong with that, and the AKC certainly isn't going to call everybody up and go, hey, you didn't check your variety. They could, they got your money, they registered your dog, you got your numbers and stuff. It'd be nice to have the data, but we don't have it. But even just looking at those 11,394 dogs, really the numbers go back more to the 70s where it had numbers that we could deal with, 88 dogs there, and then you got your thousands, and then again, the last 2 years is only 295 that were checked off, and I'm sure there were a lot more smooths that were registered, but just not checked off. Mean number of generations about the same.
Dr. Bell, I just don't know where I checked that off on the registration.
There isn't? I mean, somehow it's getting through, so you need to call the AKC and say, but this is a registration, this is not coming from your entries though. This is coming from when you register your dog. These numbers are fixed once your dog is registered. They don't go back retroactively and go, oh, look, it was shown as a smooth, I'm going to add it onto the registration data. So when the AKC sends a certificate, it asks you what color, and for most breeds that have varieties, it should ask you for the variety. So if it's not asking you for it, you need to contact the AKC, because the AKC is a club of parent clubs. You run the AKC. And you say, we want variety on our registration slips, you can make it happen very easily.
I was just confused where the number was coming from the database.
I don't know. I'm only telling you what I got. They gave it to me, this is what I found. All right, let me move on, because we're gonna run late on this stuff if we don't. So essentially, your all generation inbreeding coefficient here, 12 and 13, is a little higher than the 9.3, 9.9. So it looks like your smooths are a little bit more tightly bred than the average of the collie breed. All right, and maybe because you're concentrating on smooths, you're concentrating on a subset of your population, and not that 12 or 13% is still an average, is still way in the middle of the average for most breeds. So it's not a bad thing, but it tells us that your smooth population is a slightly different population than the rest of your population, if that's what you're concentrating on. So that's all that is. It's not a good or bad. It's just that you have a subpopulation that you're concentrating on. Yes?
Would that be because they're dominant?
Not necessarily, because you're still selecting. You can say because it's dominant, but if you're trying to produce smooths, then you're always going to a smooth. So and you only need one because it is a dominant.
You can breed to a rough, but you'll always get smooth if they're dominant, because they're dominant.
Right, but one of the mating must always be a smooth. So you are limiting yourself to at least one smooth in that mating if you're breeding for smooth, and not the majority of the collie breed that is not smooth. So that's all I'm saying, is that it's a subpopulation. And again, not that it's a good thing or bad thing, but it is more that when we look at test numbers, you're going to see that the smooth numbers are a little different than the rough numbers as well. And somehow the testing companies know that, and I think it's because they're running the genetic test for smooth and rough so that they know your coat length just from the DNA.
Dr. Bell, good point. Karen just pointed out that small number, that 295, and Bobby doesn't know where to check off on the blue form. Us Canadians, but we often double register a dog. So is that small number coming from Canadian dogs?
This is the AKC registration database.
An AKC registration, like we submitted to AKC.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I'm going to move on this. I just wanted to point it out to you so you guys know what the data is telling you. I can't, we're going to hold back questions because we're going to, I don't want to be here till 1 o'clock. So I really want to try to end this at noon and get enough questions in about the stuff that's really, really important. We can talk about this later and you can contact the AKC about it as well. So this is just a graph of those inbreeding coefficients over time for the all AKC database, 5 generation 10 and all. Because if you have a closed stud book, your starting inbreeding coefficient is going to be higher. Because you have a closed stud book, your inbreeding coefficients, your all generation inbreeding coefficients can never go down. Okay, you have a gene pool, you can lose genes, but you can't gain genes if you're not adding new blood to your breed. All right, so the reason these numbers go down is because more dogs are being added to the pedigree database, to the registration database from different backgrounds or whose pedigrees don't go back to the connections to the rest of the breed, the earlier on connections. And that's why the graph goes down when you look at a registration database, because they're just adding more dogs that were not in the database before, even though they do connect up earlier on. Okay, and just to compare it to other breeds, the average, most breeds are somewhere in the 10, 12, 14% for their average inbreeding coefficients. These are based on going through the 2020. I did this slide a while ago. You got your breeds with really high inbreeding coefficients that they know that they have a narrow gene pool and greater homozygosity, the Norfolks, the Tollers, the Bull Terriers. Some of them that are populous breeds, but actually did it to themselves from popular sires, the Bichons. It's a populous breed, but they had this huge popular sire effect where a top stud dog got replaced by his son who became a top stud dog, who got replaced by his son who became a top stud dog, and the entire breed just truncated on a single breeding line. Definitely not something you want to do, and we'll talk about that. And then you've got some of your outbred breeds here, your Samoyeds, Bernese Mountain Dog. People talk about, how sick Bernese Mountain Dogs, they've got histiocytosis and all this other stuff. Yes, they've got some genetic diseases that are at actually histiocytosis is not at a high frequency, but it's a big, big disease for the breed because it kills them. But it's really a pretty outbred breed. It's not because of inbreeding that they have that disease. It's because of happenstance that they had that disease and they concentrated the gene or genes for it. Borzoi are also a pretty outbred breed in terms of their background. And even with the popularity of the Cocker Spaniels, when they were the big, after Lady and the Tramp, when they got their big bump, and they still were quite a diverse breed and not an inbred breed. Okay, so Embark's molecular genetic COI analysis, they're predicting that their median homozygosity for your breed is 38%. And the average for all breeds is about 41 or so. So as a breed, in terms of a genetically determined, based on DNA homozygosity, you guys are a little bit more outbred than the average breed in that regard. Now, Embark calculates their COI. Every company calculates it differently. Embark likes to use what are called runs of homozygosity. So entire segments of chromosomes that are being passed uniformly across the breed, that represents homozygosity from ancestral pieces of chromosomes that have been passed on over the generations. Because you don't inherit genes, you inherit little pieces of chromosomes, and it's explained in the handout that we'll someday get here. So Wisdom Panel, you're going to find much higher numbers. They're going to say that collies are more like 66% homozygous. But what they're calculating is they're looking at individual gene pairs. and saying how much homozygosity is there in the gene pairs, and it's 66%. Now, I still don't know how they differentiate from the variable versus non-variable, because that's a little fuzzy, and it's not something you can easily figure out. I mean, they know what's homozygous for dogs, and I'm sure they're not counting that, or everybody would just be 99. Or 99 point something. But again, the different companies look at different things. But if you're looking at the calculations, it once again tells you that you guys are not bottlenecked into a really tight homozygosity, where you need to worry about homozygosity and rescuing your breed in terms of breeding for a number instead of breeding for traits and health. Because again, you add something to your selection panel that doesn't have anything to do with actually making a better dog, you're just decreasing your chances of moving forward for the stuff that you need to be selecting for. Okay, let's look a little bit about, and I'm going to go a little fast on this, but to catch up a little bit here. And but this is just based on the AKC pedigrees, the backgrounds of your breed. So again, it's only going to go back to the 1950s. I mean, when I have a deep pedigree database from a small population breed, we're going back to the 1800s. We're going way, way back, and it's really interesting. Dogs that show up 1 million times on everybody's pedigree, you know, it really makes it very, very interesting. But at least it gives us some idea here. So for the 1950s, I don't know that any of you would know these names, and some of them I couldn't even find a name because I don't have the old stud books, and I couldn't, you know, I tried, you know, Googling and doing all sorts of stuff. I was able to figure out about 20 of them just by the AKC numbers. But I wasn't able to figure out all of them. But you've got, you know, in the 1950s, 9% relationship on average, every single collie to Arrow Hill High Score, 7% to this male here, 5% to Scotland's Casanova, 4% to this bitch here, Canebrooks Bow Ideal, Southern Daisies of Dunsdale, and Windcall Southern Glen. Anyone ever heard of these dogs? A little bit? Okay. So by the 1960s, all of those guys are gone. Now, again, you're looking at a very truncated, there weren't a lot of dogs in the AKC database from the 50s, so I don't know how representative that was truly of the entire breed. And now once we get into the decades where they actually have every single collie in there, our data is going to be a lot more accurate. But Parader's Country Squire was born in 58, and in the 60s, he jumps in at 2%. You know, he is the most dominant dog at 2% in the 1960s. And then in the 1970s, he jumps from 2 to 4%. So every single collie born in the 1970s was at least on average 4% of Parader's Country Squire. You've heard of him, right? Okay. So Fairhaven's Golden Shaleen, 2%. Colmore's Conspirator, 2%. Ginger Bellbrook's Choice, 2%. 1980s, Parader's Country Squire is up to 6% now. So this isn't because he's a popular sire, and in actuality, or necessarily a popular sire. I don't have him on here anyway. But what it means is he produced quality. So what he produced, people said, I like this dog, I'm going to breed it. And then they produced quality. And people said, I like this, I'm going to breed it. And they produced quality. And people said, I like this, I'm going to breed it. And that's how these percentages go up. It's not about popular sire. Some of these dogs may only have a handful of offspring. But if their offspring have a handful of offspring and so on down the generations, and they keep producing quality, their genes are being passed on. If they stop producing quality, those numbers drop off pretty rapidly. And I've done analyses like this in certain breeds where, you know, numbers go up, 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 and all of a sudden, boom, they disappear. And everyone goes, yeah, we know why that disappeared, because they figured out what was being passed on, and all of a sudden, it wasn't a favored line anymore, or a favored dog. Okay, and then you've got, you know, in the 1980s, a whole bunch of new dogs coming in here. So from 76, Twin Creeks True Grit was born in 76, and the 1980s contributed 3%. That tells me that that dog was a popular sire, because he's only 4 years old going into the 1980s, and all of a sudden he's contributing 3% to the breed. Was that right? Okay. So, you know, whereas a dog from 1945, that's based on generations of producing quality. that dog. And I'm not saying that there is a quality difference between those two. I'm just saying it's more of a crapshoot with a much younger dog, because you really don't know for a good decade or two exactly what's all the things that are being passed on. And so you got 50s and 60s here in terms of those guys that are moving up. And so you'll see names here I'm sure that you're recognizing as well. In the 80s, we go to the 90s, Country Squire still at 6%, Twin Creeks True Grit up to 7%. So obviously now you're even a decade further and people are still liking what's being produced. Okay, it's Heart Inside the Gladiator, 2 to 4% in a decade. And you've got some new ones coming up here, jumping in as well. And again, not recent dogs, but dogs from far back whose ever qualities are being passed on and are still being concentrated and kept in the gene pool. In the 2000s, Country Squire now up to 7%, Twin Creeks True Grit up to 11%, Heart Inside the Gladiator up to 6%. And then you've got some new ones coming in here as well, at the 2s and the 3s. Fairhaven's Golden Celine up to 4%. 2010s, Country Squire dropped a percentage down to 6. Twin Creeks True Grit stayed at 11. Heart Inside the Gladiator up to 7%. Glen Hill Full Dress up to 4%. And then you've added 2 more, and once again, we've got a dog here born in 2005 that contributes 5 years later 2%. So this had to be a popular sire as well, Windhaven Stranger in Paradise, am I right? Okay, so it's predictable, the types of things that you would see here. And then lastly, the 2020s, which again is only this last 2 years in terms of the dogs we're looking at, but you're still seeing who the dominant influences are in your breed that have maintained themselves, because and it's not like you're purposefully looking for Twin Creeks True Grit from 1976 in your pedigrees or Country Squire from 1958. What you're looking for is quality. And the quality that they passed on is still in there, and that's what you're getting from these guys, and so forth. And then you've got a couple of more jumping in here as well. So that tells you about the recent influence in your breeds. And again, it's based on the limitations of the AKC pedigrees, but at least it tells you, from that period back, so we're going back 40, 50 years, that where the influences come from, not necessarily from the founders, where we don't have that data. So I wanted to compare rough versus smooth a little bit, and so I don't want to get into a big long thing about it. But if we just look at I did it by decades for the. Actually, I wrote rough, but this actually is the entire database. So in the 1980s, those were the numbers, and then I looked at the 11, 12,000 dogs that were labeled as smooth, and I looked at the 50s through the 80s, so the early part of that period there. And so pretty much the strong influences of Country Squire and Golden Celine and True Grit and Golden Image and Heart Inside the Gladiator, it's all the same. It's your breed, that's the background. But some of the others that were more influential in the overall database are not as influential. And you've got a bunch of dogs here that are more influential in the smooths than they are in the overall database. And I don't know how many of these guys were smooth themselves, but I suspect that some of these guys might have been just one of them? Okay. But at any rate, that's what you're, in the 50s to the 80s, that's where the smooths influence was coming from. Black Hawk of Kassan, Impromptu Ricochet, Antrim All the Way, Brandywine Tomfoolery, Valley View's Whirlaway, and Mary Oak's Midnight Star. If we look at the 90s and 2000s, so here's, again, not rough, but the entire database, and here are the smooths, you get similar numbers once again for the ones that we were expecting. Impromptu Ricochet is still a little bit higher than in the overall database, but then you've got these guys here that aren't showing up in the overall database: Black Hawk of Kassan, Antrim All the Way, Mary Oak's Midnight Star, and Pinewood's Sparkling Brut. So again, we're seeing a little bit more concentration of their genes in the smooths than in the overall database. Again, only looking at that tiny percentage that was labeled as smooth. So whether this is spurious or not, I'm just reporting the data to you, but I thought it was of interest. And then the last, the 2010s through 2022, or through 2021 really, again, the same backgrounds of the breed are the same. But once again, you get certain dogs in the smooths in that group of smooths that were identified by the AKC that are not as influential in the overall database. And that's what we're looking at there. So I thought it was a little interesting, and it does tell us that when you broke out that small percentage of smooths, that it looked a little different than the overall collie population, again indicating it is a subset of your breed. Even though you mix them and cross them, I mean, poodles have 3 varieties, and while they do mix some, I mean, more toys and minis than with the standards, but they tend to keep themselves separate. And your breed, does do a lot of crossing between the roughs and the smooths. So it's different cultures within the breeds as well, but it is showing that population is a little different. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is pedigree analysis, is looking at individual dogs' pedigrees. So I picked a couple of pedigrees here, not because of their popularity or because of people wanted their dogs up there. I really looked at the pedigrees themselves and what the pedigree told me about the breeding of that dog, so I could explain how genes are manipulated in the pedigrees of your dogs. So they may not be the most popular or the most revered collies in your breed, but just ones that show us some examples. So the first one I picked was River Runs Lion's Pride. Actually, all 3 pedigrees are bitches, so the women won out this time. So she's a bitch that was born in 2010, and I used dogs that were more recent, again because your pedigrees don't go much back beyond the 70s and so forth. So if I picked a top dog from the 80s, it would only have a couple of generations and it wouldn't really tell me a lot. So I tried to pick as late generation ones as I could. And what we can see, she's a bitch. She was born in 2010. She had 24 offspring. And when I look at pedigrees, and now we have computer programs that do it, I like to color in. I used to have all my colored markers and stuff, and I'd color in each dog that appears, more than one time. You color it in with a color, so it's what we call a common ancestor. And so Fantasy's Bronze Talisman is a great grandsire. On the sire side, sire on the top, dam on the bottom, is a great-great-grandsire on the sire side, and a double great-great-great-grandsire, and then is a 4-time great-great-great-great-grandsire on the bottom side. And then you've got a couple of others here that show up. And to be a common ancestor on a pedigree analysis, they can't all just be on the sire side or the dam side, because then it's the sire that's line bred on that dog or the dam that's line bred, but not necessarily the pedigree you're looking at. They've got to appear on both the sire and the dam side of the pedigree. So based on 5 generations, the inbreeding coefficient of River Runs Lion's Pride is 4%. All right, based on 10 generations, it's 9 point. This is a 6th-generation pedigree you're looking at. So on a 5-generation pedigree, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're only looking up to here. Okay, so we're not counting this 6th generation. And a 10-generation coefficient, 9.6%. All generation coefficient, 11.6. And again, if we had a database that went all the way back to founders, that number would be higher as well. But when we compare dogs, we're using the same database, so at least we can compare one to the other. So this is the pedigree analysis on, what was her call name? Jenna? Okay, so Jenna, the most influential dog in her pedigree is Fantasy's Bronze Talisman, which wasn't surprising because that's the one that we saw, coming up the soonest. He appears 1st and 3rd generation. He's actually 9 times in the pedigree, and he contributes a percent blood of 32% to the pedigree. So he is more influential than any grandparent. And honestly, in terms of his influence, a parent is 50%, but a parent passes on its 50% only on one side of the pedigree, and those genes are acted upon by the opposite mate's genes in every single gene pair. So if they've got a lot of dominant genes, then they're much more influential, but if they don't, then they're not as influential. So I would say that Fantasy's Bronze Talisman is probably as influential as a parent in this pedigree. and understanding that because his genes are coming down both sides of the pedigree. He was born in 1994. He had 269 offspring. Twin Creek's True Grit at 17.9, so more than a great-grandparent. He doesn't appear, though, until the 9th generation. And you think about that, he doesn't appear until the 9th generation. So first generation, 50%, 25%, 12.5, 6 1/4, 3.125, 1.57, 0.6 something, 0.3, 0.01. So ninth generation, 1 point something percent, 1.4% with an appearance in the 9th generation, but he appears 2,179 times from the 9th backwards. So the back generation is even less from each appearance, and he still contributes almost 18% to the pedigree. So dogs that you'll never see in an extended pedigree are quite influential in your breed and in your pedigrees there. And he was born in 1976. He had 613 offspring in the AKC database. Tartanside heir apparent, 16.7, again, more than any great-grandparent. Tartanside the Gladiator, heir apparent 1977, 267 offspring. The Gladiator, 1969, 378 offspring. Glen Hill Full Dress appears in the 9th generation 2,657 times. He was born in 1964. He only had 48 offspring in the AKC database. So you didn't have to be a prolific sire to be influential. You just needed to have strong offspring that were going to be bred generation after generation. The first bitch here is, no, it's not on this one. So this is the background of a dog where there is some purposeful line breeding, third generation, 4th generation, where dogs first show up. So you'll see it in your regular pedigrees, and then your background inbreeding of the breed in these deep pedigrees. So the next one I looked at was Larkspur Sun, Moon, and Stars. This was a bitch born in 2013. She has 2 offspring as of right now in the AKC database. Her call name? Riley?
She won last year.
Okay. So this is her pedigree, and you can see that she's line bred on Southlands, Bowen Island. She's a more tightly bred dog than a bitch than Jenna was. So she's got the maternal grandsire and a paternal great-grandsire and a double paternal great-great-grandsire. And usually we don't count the dogs behind the common ancestor as common ancestors if their only contribution is through their single offspring. But because Southland's Confederate Gray is also behind other dogs, that now makes that a common ancestor because it's passing on additional variations of its genes to offspring, and so did this bitch here in other areas and all of these other common ancestors going back. So in 5 generations, we're at 17.8%. So this is a line-bred dog. This is higher than the average for your breed. In 10 generations, 28.6%, and in all generations, again, based on the truncated AKC pedigrees, 29.8%. So this is a very tightly bred dog in terms of its homozygosity. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It doesn't really make any difference. It's whether it's healthy or not and what it produces and what it carries and what it shows in its phenotype. But it's just the type of mating that was done. So here, because it was a tightly bred dog, here's your 5, 10, and all generation coefficients. All of the common ancestors on this list are in close generations. You know, we only have a handful of those background individuals: Glen Hill Full Dress, Revette's Wayside Traveler, 1966, and so forth. The rest of these are all dogs that are actually kind of purposefully line bred. 50% to Southlands, Bowen Islands, the 4 times that we saw on that pedigree, starting as a grandparent. Tartanside's TH Critics Choice, 1969, had 378 offspring, appears 57 times. Tartanside the Gladiator, Tartanside heir apparent. So this is a tightly bred dog for your breed, so an example of a tightly bred dog. Lastly, I wanted to show you a completely outbred dog. And so again, because of this truncated database, I also wanted to show you the types of numbers you could possibly see, because I love showing pedigrees to breeders and to breed groups that show dogs that appear millions or tens of millions of times in a pedigree if you've got a really complete database. And I've been lucky enough to work with some of those databases, and they're just, my wife does crossword puzzles. I'll sit there and do databases. I mean, these are just, it's so much fun for me. So at any rate, so the last dog is a dog that probably no one's ever heard of because her name is Dancer, and she's actually only 4 months old. Okay, she was born, I think, in November of last year. But she is completely outbred, and her, no offspring, of course. And and she's probably not even she's probably a pet or a backyard bred dog. I mean, who knows? But I don't know if Circle T's or Hedge Havens are commercial kennels or what kind of kennels they are. But obviously those two lines are not related at all, going all the way back. And so we have an inbreeding coefficient at 5 generations of 0. We have an inbreeding coefficient at 10 generations of 0. And we have an inbreeding coefficient for all generations going back 40 generations of 1.6% homozygosity. So this is as outbred as you can possibly get. And so it makes it exciting because everybody that you're looking at is the background of the breed. There are no close relatives that are common ancestors. The closest relative that's a common ancestor is Valiant Dark Sultan down here, who appears for the first time in the 8th generation, appears 43 times. Everyone else is the background of your breed, hundreds of thousands of times that they appear, not even starting until the 11th, 12th, and 13th generations of the pedigree. And so if you had a complete database that went back to founders, multiply these numbers by 10 or 100, or actually by 10, let's say, and that's the kind of numbers that you would see in your database from the dogs much earlier on than Country Squire and True Grit and the guys that were born in the 60s and the 70s, because that's as far as that AKC database goes back. So just to understand that, when you're saying I'm line breeding on a certain dog, you're not just line breeding on that dog. This is what you're line breeding on. When you're breeding any collie, this is what you're breeding on. This is the background and the basis of your breed, and this is what we need to pay attention to. So once again, on some moderate line breeding, the inbreeding coefficient started going up at 5 generations on Jenna. It started going up even in the 2nd generation on Riley, and it didn't even start going up until the 12th generation on Dancer. So really looking at the number of generations that you're calculating that coefficient, if you're using a pedigree database program that's online or whatever else, you need to know that you can't compare this number with that number with this number. You have to compare the same generation in order to actually compare one dog to the other. Okay, questions. Are absolute levels of breed homozygosity and differences in homozygosity between individual dogs important? Is it important that this dog is at 11 and this dog is at 18? Yes or no? Okay, 57% yes, 43% no. Okay, next question. Why? Set breed type? Trait focus? We got a yes left over. Health? Better opportunity? Breed type and consistency? Keyword absolute. That is a keyword. More consistent. So we know that homozygosity can create more uniformity, and that heterozygosity can bring in more novel genes or more diversity into your individual dog. And so really, these latest answers tighten the family, depends on what traits are the focus, can't get to absolute homozygosity predictability. The bottom line is the homozygosity and line breeding or outbreeding are tools. And we're being told that they're goals. And they're not, they are tools. If you want to bring something in that you don't have, if you don't have a certain trait and you see the dogs that have that and I wish I had that, well, you need to outbreed to those dogs because you probably don't have that in your background. Okay, so that's when you outbreed. If you now have it and you want to get it fixed, not fix it because it's broken, but fix it so it reproduces uniformly, then you want to line breed on it. Okay, because then you're going to get homozygosity and you're going to fix that trait in your line. So those are tools. These are breeding tools and not breeding goals. And unfortunately, we're being told by the commercial company that these numbers are your goals. You need to breed to numbers. It's like, if you want to become an artist, you need to paint by number. That's the way you become an artist, okay? It's not, you can't breed by number. You need to breed the individual dogs and the traits and utilize the tools that are necessary in order to get those goals. If you breed and you produce some bad stuff, but you really love your line and you've had good stuff in the past, what are you going to do next generation? You're going to outbreed, right? Because if you line bred and you said, oh my God, look what I got there. I'm not going to do that for a while. I'm going to bring stuff in. I'm going to look for the best stuff I can find, and I'm going to keep what I have and not lose it. So I need to select for the same stuff that I have, but I need to select for the stuff that I don't have that isn't in my background. And that's how you do that. Okay. So in order to understand about breeds, you must understand about breed evolution. Oh, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Thank you all for the pictures I stole off your websites to populate the talk today. So if you see your dogs and your pictures up there, thank you. Okay. The development of breeds occurred through artificial selection for body type, color, coat type, behavior, and conformational aspects. That's how we created our breeds. As breed lines became more specialized and stud books closed, those who did not conform to the standard were removed from breeding. Evolution of breeds. Studies of dog breeds estimate that they lose on average 35% of their genetic diversity through breed formation. This was a study done in 2009. I'll tell you, they were wrong. You lose much more than that. Okay, when you're creating a breed, you are creating homozygosity for your breed. You breed two collies together, you get a collie. I mean, you don't, and they look like collies and they act like collies, and that's what we were trying to do. We are trying to create homozygosity. All right, so if someone tells you homozygosity is bad, then they're telling you, we don't want your dogs. Okay, because breeds are inbred. And it's not a bad thing as long as we can maintain their health and their quality. So this is a typical AKC Collie pedigree, again based on a truncated AKC database. So this is what you're used to looking at. The dog, the parents, the grandparents. This is the pedigree that you look at as a regular pedigree, and then it goes back to all of the individuals behind it. But because it stops in the 70s, 60s, 50s, it looks like you've got a bunch of weird founders back here that aren't really founders. So this is what an actual breed pedigree of a single dog looks like. So the AKC pedigree for the collies ended probably right around here. Went to about here and then just kind of died off. But this is what a full pedigree back to founders looks for a breed. You've got your founders here, they're breeding, they're producing good stuff, they're producing lousy stuff. They're discarding what didn't produce right, they're breeding what did produce right, whether it's a working or a conformational phenotype or a behavioral phenotype. And they breed and replace, and they breed and discard, and then finally they get uniformity, and then they start to expand their population. So this is the period of breed expansion here, where they're expanding their gene pool, they're getting more dogs to breed and more dogs to select from, so that they have greater chances of selection for what they're looking for. And then if they really maintain themselves as a breed and it catches on, you get this population explosion where everybody now wants your breed, and hopefully you can maintain control and quality of it without it all going down the tubes because everybody's breeding a collie now. But this is what a pedigree of a single dog looks like. So in actuality, this breed's gene pool goes all the way up to there and all the way down to there, and it's only kind of diamond shaped because now you're only looking at the dogs behind this individual dog's pedigree that it contains. But if you look at a dog up here in this part of the gene pool, it's going up there, and a dog down in this part of the gene pool, it's going all the way down there. So that's what a breed gene pool looks like. Any selection over generations will create homozygosity, uniform purposeful selection for breeding goals, and diminished frequency of undesirable genes, whether traits or diseases. Any selection will cause a loss of genetic diversity. Selection causes a loss of genetic diversity. So when you're dealing with endangered species, what they don't want to do is select. They don't want to look at anything that is called selection, because selection means discarding others. You are breeding everybody, regardless of what they look like, what they act like, how sick they are. A sick animal can still be melded into an endangered species and diluted out rather than lose that unique pedigree of a species that will never come back again. And that is the basis of species preservation plans. A loss of genetic diversity that is selected for quality is not detrimental to the population if it increases its superiority. Breed-defining genes would be expected to become homozygous due to selection over time. These include breed-selected traits for size, coat color, texture, behavior, skeletal morphology, and other traits. Even without close line breeding, selection for positive traits will increase their homozygosity, having originated from distant ancestors. You don't need to purposefully line breed to keep on increasing your homozygosity. You just need to be breeding to a standard and breeding for quality dogs, and you will continue to increase the homozygosity of the breed. And it is not a bad thing as long as you're not collecting detrimental genes. So modern breed population statistics. You have high, deep pedigree average inbreeding coefficients or homozygosity. All pure breeds do. High homozygosity, it's not bad. Low effective population size or a limited number of founders. I wasn't able to show you that with your breed because we don't have a database that goes back to founders. A high average relationship coefficient to influential ancestors. We saw the influential ancestors from the 70s and the 80s on the AKC database. There are a lot more influential ancestors that we did not capture from much earlier in the 1900s. Many of these with contributions of 15 to 35%. There are breeds where every single individual in breed, bearded collies, Bailey of Bathanalis, or something like that, 35%. Every single bearded collie has 35% of his genes. And he wasn't a founder, but he was a dog that was just epitomized and passed on what an ideal bearded collie should have, and that's why he's up there, because of his quality. These are necessary and expected consequences of breed formation and evolution. That is not a collie, but that was my first master hunter, Mr. Smith, so he got to jump in there a little bit. Okay, homozygosity is not inherently correlated to impaired genetic health, nor does it need to be artificially controlled. And this is where we're having issues, is that commercial companies realize not only can they calculate homozygosity, but they can easily sell it. And so they can commercialize it and market it and make a lot of money selling inbreeding coefficients and saying that you need to use that in your breedings. You need to be almost ignoring those numbers unless you're having specific issues to deal with. When I look at a breed gene pool and I say, look at you, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, your total average inbreeding coefficient your total always goes up. Your 10 generations going down, okay? That means you're utilizing the breadth of your gene pool. So common ancestors on the 11th and 12th generation are no longer being calculated in, but if your 10 generation inbreeding coefficient or even your 5 generation inbreeding coefficient goes down, which isn't as important because that just means that not a lot of people are line breeding, it means you're utilizing the breadth of your gene pool. But that's based on analysis of hundreds of thousands of dogs. It's not based on what you're doing with your one dog today in your breeding. It really doesn't make a whole lot of difference what that number is as a goal as much as a breeding tool. Healthy breed gene pools require expanding or large stable populations. You have that. So, this is a slide more for your small population breeds. Population contraction causes a loss of breed diversity and quality breed lines. Selection of breeding animals should represent the quality traits and the breadth of pedigree background. Quality lines should not be abandoned. So hopefully your older breeders, your more mature mentors that are out there, hopefully they're, when they decide not to continue breeding, hopefully their lines are represented in your dogs and you're not losing lines. Hopefully coming out of the recession, people that weren't breeding, maintained breed lines that can then be bred again to maintain the backgrounds of your breeds. That's what genetic diversity is about. Genetic diversity is not about creating the diversity of your entire breed in a single dog with a low inbreeding coefficient, because you can't do that, okay? Because there's only 2 gene pairs. There's not hundreds of gene pairs, hundreds of genes in a pair, okay? Your genetic diversity is the gene pool. It's not a single dog. If you want to maintain genetic diversity, you need to maintain your breed lines, not your homozygosity. Popular sire syndrome. So this is a geneticist's pedigree. Males are squares, females are circles, matings are horizontal, and offspring are vertical. So let's say a dog comes along and everyone oohs and ahs and says, oh my God, look at that magnificent dog, I want to breed my bitch to him. And so bitches are brought to him from different areas of the gene pool, and he's producing really nice dogs, and everyone's going, wow, look what he's just stamping himself right on those dogs. And everybody wants to come to him, and then they start line breeding on him, and very, very quickly, within 1 or 2 generations, his genes are very quickly spread across the gene pool, where sometimes it's hard to find a line that doesn't have him in it. And that's what the popular sire syndrome is. It's the single most influential factor in restricting breed gene pool diversity. The overuse of a popular sire quickly disseminates his genes throughout the gene pool, and here's the point, without the benefit of evaluation over time. All of his offspring and grand offspring are being produced, and without your knowing what they're going to produce or what's actually being passed on by that individual. But the more insidious thing about the loss of genetic diversity is that there are only so many quality bitches that are getting bred with each generation. And if a popular sire is overusing the quality bitch lines, you're sidelining other quality males that should be used for breeding and are going to be lost to the gene pool. And so that's the insidious thing about the popular sire syndrome. And if another 2 generations down the line, you realize, oh my God, look at all the crap that's coming out from that dog, and now we need to avoid him, you are losing an entire generation of your quality bitches that were bred to him, because you need to select against them too. So you're really taking steps back with that. So breed, but breed judiciously. I don't have time to tell my story now, but I had a dog that that produced some really quality young bitches. Everyone wanted bred to him, and we sent him to the field trainer for his senior hunter title, just so we can say, yeah, he's not available, because we didn't want 5 or 6 more dogs being bred in the same year to him, or bitches bred to him. We wanted to see how these guys grew up and how they did, and he became a top 10 producer for the breed, but during his time. But you really, as a stud dog owner, it's very flattering to get asked, but you really need to also consider what you're doing to your breed in that way. A popular sire's influence is different from that of an influential ancestor. An influential ancestor contributions are continually evaluated through its descendants, who have to compete with others for breeding status. So you know that they're being evaluated with each generation. But for a popular sire, you don't have that ability. Okay, so lastly, diseases and disorders. Before we take our break, or what I call, watch carefully, the dark side of breed development. So all individuals carry some deleterious mutations. Quality individuals who propagate will also propagate their deleterious mutations, and these can cause breed-related disease if they're disseminated and increase in frequency through the founder's effect. So this is why you always need to monitor and watch for what is being produced. Breed propagation must always include active monitoring and selection. So monitoring is health testing, as well as health surveys, and we'll talk about that in the second part. Without this and then selection, you need to do your health tests, and you need to use your health test results in your selection decisions. You can't just say, yeah, I ran my tests, now I'm going to breed to this one anyway, because that's who I want to breed to anyway. You need to utilize it in that way. Without this selection, the genetic health of the breed will decline. Health is not a natural consequence of breeding. So you can't just breed and expect health. You got to work on it. You can't just breed and expect quality. You got to work on it. Anyone that got into breeding thought that this was going to be easy? Okay. So the genetic health of dog breeds, this last part I'm going to skip through because I think I've pressed the point and I want to catch up a little bit on time here. Genetic health of dog breeds is not a direct function of homozygosity or heterozygosity, but the accumulation of specific disease liability genes. So some breeds have higher homozygosity average, some have lower. It doesn't tell you anything about the health of the breed. And there are genetic companies, Embark more than Wisdom, and so I'm glad that you work a lot with Wisdom, because Embark is completely a marketing company. They want to be 23andMe for dogs, and that's the direction that they're going. And so they will tell you that you want to create a lower number and you're going to get a healthier dog. And it's just not true. It's just marketing. So for breed maintenance, I'm not going to go through all this stuff. I think we've told you already. Inbreeding, line breeding, and outbreeding does not change the frequency of defective genes or their dissemination. So the types of matings you're doing does not affect those genes at all. You need to select for or against those genes. For dispersed breed-related genes, it doesn't matter the type of mating, you're still going to get the affected dog. The same percentage of affected dogs with all the diseases you get are going to show up whether you line breed or whether you outbreed. Got nothing to do with it. The only difference is that if you outbreed, the affected dogs show up randomly. And if you line breed, they're going to be a little bit more predictable because you know the backgrounds of them. So if you want to know what disease looks like in a random bred population, look at your mixed breed dogs and your mixed breed cats. We see genetic disease all the time, but it just occurs randomly. So using the tools as goals is a wrong thing. I'll leave these each up for a couple of seconds so you can pause them when you read this. But selection for heterozygosity selects against the good homozygosity that your breeds have been working on for generations, and that they want to break up and destroy just by saying you need to take all your low frequency genes and make them much higher frequency, even though it's probably taken you generations to make those low frequency because they represent deleterious traits and genes. They have no idea what those chromosome segments code for when they look at a minor allele frequency or a minor frequency. All they're saying is, it's really low, this one's really high, you need to equalize that, because that's what a species survival plan would do. It's completely against what we're trying to do with selected breeding. Genetic diversity is breeder diversity. It's the varied opinion of breeders as to what constitutes the ideal animal and their selection of breeding stock that maintains breed diversity. If some people like us this type, and some people like that type, and if some people want to line breed because they like what they have here, and some people want to go out because they want to bring something in, everyone doing something a little different is what maintains genetic diversity and breed diversity. Everyone doing exactly the same thing, whether it's line breeding to a certain line and getting a popular sire syndrome, whether it's outbreeding and completely randomizing your breed, is a bad thing. Everyone's got to be doing something a little different. Genetic screening, selection against diseases and their associated liability genes. Moderation away from extremes that cause disease should be a guiding principle in breeding and judging. Okay? If you have extremes that you're selecting for and they predispose to disease, I'm not saying stop, but moderate it a little bit. If your eye shape predisposes to Collie eye anomaly, moderate it a little bit, and improve the situation. Okay? Don't deny that the eye shape has nothing to do with it, but say, do I need as much of a slit eye as I've got right now, or can I round it up just a little bit and decrease how much Collie eye that I have and that I'm going to produce? Moderation. Your mother was right. This is my latest mantra. Pre-breeding health screening should become as universal as equine pre-purchase exams. I don't know if there are any horse people, but no one would buy a horse without a pre-purchase exam, or you have no idea whether you'll ever be able to ride the horse or use it for your purposes. Pre-breeding health screening tells you what you've got. Okay? It doesn't make the decisions for you, but it gives you the data that you need to make your decisions. And so this is why we need to do health screening. It's not just your genetic testing. It's a health examination. The heart, the skin, allergies. I mean, you know, there's certain, you know, look at the health record, you know, of your dogs. You know, seizures. I mean, there aren't genetic tests for these things. You need to know what you've got and breed with eyes wide open. Okay, I'm not saying don't breed them, but don't double up on them and try to improve what you've got. So last slide, breed maintenance. Avoid popular sire syndrome. Utilize quality dogs from the breadth of your population to expand the gene pool. Monitor genetic health issues through regular health surveys, and I'll talk about that. Doing genetic screening for breed-related disorders, participating in open health registries to manage genetic disorders so you understand what's going on with your breeds, and constant selection for quality and for health. So that's the first half, and I did go over, and can we take 10 minutes and come back at 10:50? Okay, and I'll tighten it up for the second part because there's a lot of important stuff for us to go over
Okay.
with disease.